Most people, when they came to Marietta back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, lived in either Pine Forest or Marietta Place. So it was a big deal. There were 3 ballparks there. The Little League Park, which was named for a young man that was killed on a bicycle in West Dixie. Then the Polo League Field for Heck Field. And then the American Legion Field that was in the Lairville Complex. So there were children all around. And this young lady went to a laundromat near our house and was killed, 9 years old. But the cold case, the reason I would like for what Mr. Nix to share with us, I don't care about the DNA and all that. I mean, this is something that affected our community in such a way, and it affected all our lives. And Marsh, he lived at Marietta Place. He went to school at Allgood, Park Street, in Pine Forest where she went. So, he could feel it. She was a little bit younger than us, but it was there. But, and I was privileged to be able to work on the Girls Club. We built it with nothing. The county gave us property, Marietta supported us, and all of a sudden within a year and a half we had a Girls Club. Because, girls didn't even have the sports programs. So it was there. But it goes hand in hand how we have to invest in our young people. But if you could share with us the 50-year journey and explain, your role in it. But his only mistake was he left the Marietta school system and graduated from Wheeler. But we'll forgive you for that. Please come up and share with us.
First of all, I want to thank you for having me. I'm going to try to compress 50 years into this. I'm glad the Chief Rain's here because I know he remembers. How many of you remember when this happened? Okay, this was 1972. I'll tell you a little bit about Debbie, and I'll tell you a little bit about what the environment was then. Debbie was 9 years old. She weighed about 70 pounds. She was bright. She was very popular. She loved to play with dolls. At the time, over in Marietta Place, there was a laundromat called the Suds and Duds. And Debbie's family lived literally right across the street. They lived on 1st Street, and you could just about yell across the street. So her family took a lot of criticism because people didn't understand that, what was she doing there at night by herself at 9 years old? This was 1972. It was a little bit of a different time. But it was a gathering place for the girls to play with dolls because there was nowhere else for them to go. So they would meet there and they would swap clothes and do what girls do to play with dolls. Debbie came out to walk across the street and she vanished. For 16 days, people were looking for her. 4,000 people, 4,000 volunteers turned out for this. We had received national press. Debbie was found 16 days later off of Powers Ferry Road. It became the Houston's Restaurant. Now I think something else is there. She was approximately about 60 feet off the road. It was all wood then. And Debbie had been out there for 16 days, and that's when her body was located. Captain Elliott, I believe was Bill Elliott, is that correct, Chief? Captain Bill Elliott was the first person that had this case. And to say it consumed him, I think is an understatement. I actually found his wife. She lives over in Smyrna. I went and interviewed her, and we talked about how that affected Bill Elliott. Lieutenant Ray Owens worked with him on this case. And at that time, there was a detective named Bill Hudson, who would later become Sheriff Hudson. They worked on this case, and then I'm told that later Captain Buckley was involved in this case. So we didn't have the technology that we have now. So after a while, this case went cold. They did everything that they could do. They put a lot of work into this case. If you work a cold case, which is so different than an active case, the first thing, and I teach this to people, I teach a lot at the police academies, is that the first thing when you get a cold case is you cannot beat yourself up over what was or was not done at the time. Yeah, we had a lot of questions. But we also thought if we can get anything out of this, maybe we got a shot. One of the guys on the cold case unit, this cold case was formed under Vic Reynolds at the DA's office. His name was Tony Gentile, and he was on the unit. And we went down to Marietta PD and asked them if we could have a look at the evidence, and we didn't even know if they had any evidence. I mean, you got to keep in mind, this is 40-something years later. They bring out a dusty box. We set out and looked it out, and there was quite a bit of material there. Now, a lot of things weren't there, but there was a lot there that we thought we could work with. So we went to work on this case. The first problem I think I run into is that everybody was deceased. We got to start to interview people, and they're all dead. Captain Elliott was not here. Ray Owens was not here. Captain Buckley was not here. I guess, Chief, you're the only one surviving just about from that time. I did talk to Sheriff Hudson. I would talk to him often about this, and I could tell that it affected him deeply. He would have a hard time talking about Debbie Lynn Randall. I have always said that this was probably Marietta's best time and its worst time. It was the worst time because of what happened. Debbie was brutally, brutally assaulted. And if you ever saw the photograph, they would haunt you forever. It was a horrific crime. It's something that we just can't wrap our heads around this. But it was our best time. When Debbie Lynn Randall came up missing and the city came together to look for her, this city literally crossed every boundary, we crossed every line, and everybody came together to find Debbie. People were angry, people were afraid, and people wanted answers. You got to remember that we did not have the technology that we have today, so we didn't have, mass communication. We didn't have social media, unlike the John Benet Ramsey case. And I'm thankful for everything she got, but there was a lot of worldwide mass media with John Benet's case. Debbie was from the projects. Nobody knew who Debbie was. If you weren't in Marietta, you really kind of forgot about Debbie. Debbie became just a name that would come up every now and then. I felt very strongly about that. I wanted Debbie to have every opportunity. So that's why we went to work on this case. Time goes by. So we get the evidence from Marietta PD, and let me be very clear about this. Without the diligence of the Marietta Police Department doing what they did, this case would have never been solved. Without Captain Elliott and the people that worked with him and around him, this case would have never been solved. Without the community of Marietta, this case would have never been solved. No one solved this case. This was a combined effort over 50 years. We all kind of came together and worked on this. I did not solve this case. Let me be very clear about that. I was just someone who kind of pushed it toward the goal line. Debbie's family. I remember talking to Debbie's mother, and it's hard for me even now to talk about this, but she knew that she had leukemia. She knew her days were numbered. All she wanted was to know who got her little girl. My deepest regret about this case is that we weren't able to give her an answer. Debbie's father called me one time, it was about midnight, 12:30 at night, John Randall. He was very upset, very emotional. He was crying, and you want to give him, what do you say? My mom taught me when I was very young. She said, son, and I've never forgotten this, one of the greatest gifts you can give another human being is that of hope. If you can give someone hope. I always tried to give the Randall family hope. So we go along, we submit some evidence that we had. not knowing whether or not it would be degenerated, we could get anything out of it. But I also knew at this time, if we got nothing out of this DNA, probably this case was not going to be solved. I was on my way to a fishing trip to Lake Eufaula, and I get a phone call from John Dawes, who was on the unit. He says, pull over. So I pull over, and he says, we got a partial hit. Well, I don't know anything about DNA. I still don't know a lot about DNA. But I knew that it gave us some hope. So basically partial, we couldn't say who did it, but we could tell you who didn't do it. We also know at that time her attacker was a single white male. And that's pretty much it. So we kind of go cold. But I remember telling my wife, I said, let me tell you something. I don't know if it's going to be 5 years, 20 years, or another 50 years. Technology will advance at some point, and we're going to know who did this. Well, guess what? It was a little less than 7 years that we'll know what happened to Debbie. In the meantime, Ron Alter at the DA's office had kind of picked this thing up. And I also want to say something to Grant Foster and Mark Arian in the Marietta Police Department. I was driving them nuts. I was calling there constantly, asking questions, and they were always professional and gracious to me as they could be. But everybody wanted to do something with this. But I get a call from Ron Alter at DA's office, and he tells me we're submitting some new technology, and we think we got a link. We've narrowed it down to 2 families, one we believe in Florida and Tennessee, but it's going to take a while. Okay. I was used to waiting. I'd been waiting for years. Okay. So time rocks along. He called me one day, and as soon as I saw who it was, I picked up the phone. I said, tell me something good. He said, we know which family it is. I cannot tell you in this room that it wasn't emotional. It was overwhelming. Okay. So a little bit later, we're down the road. I'm trying to push 50 years in together here. A little bit down the road, they exhumed the body. He called me back and said, it's him. 1000%, it's him. It's just an absolute flood of emotion. I called Melvin Randall, who now lives in South Carolina, and we had a very long emotional talk, and it was just very overwhelming. Tomorrow, I think, as the mayor mentioned, at Girls Inc. at 10:45, they're going to dedicate a bench to Debbie, which I'm just really excited about. Even as we speak, there's a production company here in Marietta filming a story on this. So they're here today. I'll answer any questions about this that you might have, if I can help anybody with anything. This is a big day for Marietta. This is a big time for Marietta. A lot of questions were answered. I had people tell me, I had so many people that contacted me over the years. And I talked to all the Marietta people, and I would talk to the sheriff, and anybody that said I lived there, did you know him? And I would, try to get all the information. I got this many notes at home that I was always writing things down, trying to keep track of things. And I never really got to talk to Captain Elliott like I wished I could have. And I thought about him immediately. I still think about him, and I just like to think somehow he knows what the deal, him and Ray Owens. I never knew Ray Owens. I never met him. If you have any questions, I will try to answer those. Yes?
Yeah. Where was the body exhumed from, and how long had the perpetrator been deceased?
Good question. Debbie was abducted and murdered in 1972. This gentleman committed suicide in 1974, which was one of the reasons we couldn't find him. There were 2 or 3 things I really had in my mind looking at this. One, did Debbie know her abductor? Did she walk over to the vehicle? Maybe he called her over, or did it was just a random thing? I know now it was random. I think he was riding around in that neighborhood just looking for an opportunity. He saw Debbie come out of the laundromat. He was exhumed, I don't want to say exactly where, but I will tell you it was in Cobb County. His family, my thoughts and prayers are with them. And one thing that struck me about this is that Melvin Randall, if any of you saw the interview that he did, he forgave that man. He said, I forgive him. He said, and I forgive his family. And he said, I want his family to understand that I hold no malice toward them. So, I don't know that I could do that if that were my sister. But, and I'm sorry, what was the rest of your question? Okay, but, yeah, but one of the questions was, did she know her abductor? Where did the assault actually occur? In 1972, the FBI did a soil analysis on her clothes. And we found out this particular soil came from the Mississippi Delta area. The only people that had that soil at that time, to our knowledge, was a place called Dixie Cast and Stone, which was off of Powers Ferry Road. They are still in business today, but they're in the Austell area. So we felt like this attack occurred there. So I go talk to the owners of Dixie Cast and Stone. And his name's Franklin Brown, if anybody knows him. But he told me this would have been the perfect place. It was off Powers Ferry Road, a sand pits back there. Nobody would have hurt her. I also found out that they used a lot of transient labor. Back in the day, some companies would come pick up people literally right out of jail and use them for labor. I'm sure Chief remembers this. And Dixie Cast and Stone did that. I wondered if it was somebody from the military base. Could it have been someone stationed at Dobbins and they were transient? I thought, how could someone do something this horrific and only do it one time? At one point, I started looking at all the people who had been executed, wondering perhaps they had been arrested in another state and had since been executed. So I started in Georgia and started working the Southeast. I could not get a connection. I went to Alabama and I interviewed Judith Ann Neely. I don't know if that name rings a bell with Judith Ann Neely, but I went there and interviewed her because they could have been in Marietta at that approximate time. For those of you that don't know who Judith Ann, this was a very sadistic crime. Judith Ann Neely and her boyfriend, Alvin, kidnapped a little girl named Judy Milliken out of a mall in Rome. Judy injected her with Drano and liquid plumber, trying to kill her. And so it just takes a very sadistic behavior. But I did go and I interviewed Judy. She was on death row at one point. I was convinced they were not in Cobb County at that time. So, but I wondered if she knew her abductor. I wondered exactly where it had taken place, and I'm convinced he abducted her, took her to Dixie Cast and Stone. That's where the assault occurred. He redressed her body, takes her right down the road on Powers Ferry Road. The ME's office said that had he not strangled her, she would have bled to death. That was how horrific this was. I think why he stopped there, I often wonder why there, because it's right down the road. Either she was bleeding in his vehicle so much that he had to get her out of the vehicle, or two, she was still alive. And he had to stop immediately and get her out of the vehicle. We'll never know the answer. But I do know that the person who did this, his name was William Rose. He was not on our radar. He was not on anybody's radar. And I think the reason we can get a hit on him in CODIS is, again, he had committed suicide approximately 2 years after this happened. And I told everybody all the time, we're not looking for a pedophile, we're looking for a sadist. I had so many people tell me, you know, We never, ever locked our doors until this happened. Even in the project, people, we didn't lock our doors at night. But once this happened, people started locking their doors. It changed Marietta. It was a defining moment for this city. If anybody had any questions?
Was he an older gentleman when he did this?
He was 26. He was 26 years old. I had an eyewitness who claimed she saw the abduction. I did 3 podcasts with Nancy Grace on her crime stories. I had a witness that claimed she saw the abduction. I found her somewhat credible. She said that he grabbed her, threw her over his shoulder, and threw her in the driver's side. Another question that I always had, why I thought there might have been 2 people or more involved. How did he drive the vehicle and keep control of Debbie? I think probably she just cowered down in fear. Probably could not move. We had so many people that came. We had people that came forward and said they did it. We had several of those. I had 4 ex-wives that swore to me their ex-husband did it. Swore to me, absolutely convinced. We had to find these people. We had to try to get DNA from them and you know, push it, because you couldn't ignore anybody. Again, I'm just so appreciative of Captain Elliott and those guys that started this and what they did. I'm just very, you know, sad that he doesn't know. So, and
One more question.
yeah,
What do you know about the murderer? I mean, did he work around here? I mean, surely you could know a little bit about him.
he lived in Mapleton. His mom lived in the projects. She lived in that same general area. He had no prior arrest or anything like that. A couple of alcohol offenses. He committed suicide with carbon monoxide in the Mapleton area. He just really wasn't on anybody's radar. I mean, there was nothing that jumped out about him. That's what makes it so, you know, hard to kind of like wrap your head around. I told people, I said, you know, we just never know who is out there that had deep down in. We know people who do bad things. They don't wear a sign around their neck. You know, Ted Bundy, Dennis Rader, who was a BTK killer. Good family men, personable, raised their kids in right, scout leaders, little league coaches. And I always told my wife, some people deep within them, there's a demon that's dancing. My wife said, you ought to write a book called When Demons Dance. And I said, well, some people have a demon that starts dancing. I am working on a book. I'm not pushing a book, but I am working on a book. I think I'm about 5 months out on it. So I got a publisher, so hopefully that's going to answer a lot of questions for people. Yes?
Yeah. How many people officially searched for on it?
There were 4,000 volunteers that searched for.
Smaller Marietta.
Yeah. A guy named Mike McMahon is the one who found her body. Mike had just gotten back from Vietnam. He'd been a platoon leader in Vietnam, saw a lot of combat, and he was now a student at Southern Tech. They were asking for volunteers, so Mike and some of his fraternity brothers were given an area to search over off Powers Ferry Road. Mike said that when he walked back there, he said, one thing you learn in combat is to look for something that doesn't fit. He said he saw what he thought were some drag marks, and he walked down there in the woods and he saw Debbie's body. So he stopped, and so that's how Debbie was found. Anything else? Okay. My name's Morris Nix, and if any of you have any questions later on, you can get a hold of me. I know the mayor's got my number. Again, that dedication is tomorrow at 10:45 at Girls Inc., and I hope some of you can make it. Let's not forget Debbie. I've asked the mayor and the council, perhaps they will put some kind of a marker where it'll be seen. I don't want it to be in an obscure place. I want it to be some kind of a marker. And I thank all of you. I know the police department.
We appreciate your dedication.
Sir? Sir?
I said, we appreciate your dedication.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that, Chief. I want to tell you something about Chief Raines. When he was really...
No, don't do that.
Well, I won't tell that story. When I was young, you know, and growing up here in the city of Marietta, I would kind of look at the police officers and I was afraid of them. I was kind of like, I never would have approached one of them, ever. And I remember one day, I know he doesn't recall this, but he and I had a conversation. I was very young. And I do remember him. I absolutely remember the conversation we had. And it probably did a lot to get my past that being afraid. Later on, I would meet Chief Kraft. And if you knew Chief Kraft, he was just very personable. And so later on, and that kind of opened the door. So thank you, and I appreciate it.
You know, I've talked to Rupert about this case over the years, and he said the hardest one is a stranger on a stranger. I'd like to thank everybody to be here. David, I'd like to ask you to close us in prayer, please.
Sure.